They say there's no place like home, and as far as we know, there's no place like our beautiful blue planet, Earth. Occasionally, including recently, some planet-sized objects have been suggested that are at a sustainable distance from a star. However, that kind of assumption that life could exist on these planets involves certain assumptions. For example, that that planet object has a rocky surface, has a reasonable atmosphere, and possesses liquid water. And even if all of those assumptions were to be found to be true, that's a far cry from saying that life actually exists there. When a planet like that is proposed, we're usually talking about it being in what's called the Goldilocks Zone, meaning it's just right. It's not too far away from its sun, and it's not too close to its sun, to make life a possible consideration there. Now that could hardly be said about Mars. And yet there's an appeal gone out just now for people to go to Mars, to colonise Mars. The Mars One project is looking for volunteers, but it's very upfront with its tough warnings. It points out that even on the journey to get to Mars, because of the reduction in gravity that you'd experience, your bone and muscle mass would be greatly diminished, making any thought of return not really possible. And also because such a planet doesn't have a magnetic field to shield it like our Earth, shielding it from high energy particles from the sun, the radiation that a body would experience there would render it infertile. Add to that the fact that there'd be precious little atmosphere there, and you'd have to recycle your urine to get drinking water for the remainder of your life. It hardly makes it an attractive proposition, does it? So why look for life elsewhere? Why look for the possibility of colonising somewhere else other than our own beautiful planet that's so suited to life? Well, some people feel that to go and colonise elsewhere would give our species a better chance of survival in case, for example, an asteroid were to hit our Earth, or in case we would ourselves commit thermonuclear suicide. Some people's motivation is just to prove, if possible, that we are the cleverest critters in the cosmos. But there's also another motivation, for some at least, and it's bound up with solving the mystery of life. How did life arise here on this planet? Well, we know there's one big popular idea. It says that life came about by chance. Things a long time ago started simple and they became complex as we find them today. There was a man, Sir Fred Hoyle, a famous astronomer, who pointed out a fatal flaw with that idea. He says the problem for biology is that it cannot reach a simple beginning. What he meant by that was, if you delve down into the deepest earth rocks and you find fossilized bacteria, the smallest self-reproducing cells that we know about, even they are incredibly sophisticated, with the genetic code of life apparently already up and running. And so Sir Fred Hoyle said, life just couldn't have begun here by itself. It must, therefore, he concluded, have been seeded here from somewhere else out in space. And that's why others like him want to go and take a look there. Well, let's think about that. Starting with our Earth, which we know is big, but we know that there are bigger things in our solar system than planet Earth. Giants such as Jupiter and Saturn really put Earth in the shade, and we're all put in the shade by the star that we know best, which is our Sun, dwarfing all its planets. The Sun is 93 million miles away, and light arrives at us from the Sun in 8 minutes. In other words, that means it's going at 186,000 miles a second. So how far would it go if it were to travel continuously for a year? Well, the answer to that is 6 trillion miles, or 10 trillion kilometers. And that is the unit that we have to use as our yardstick for measuring space. Feet and inches and miles are no good to us. But the distance that light travels in 1 year, which is 10 trillion kilometers, that becomes our standard unit for comparing distances in space. We're going to have to use that. Before we do, let's look at something familiar. I'm sure this constellation of Orion is familiar to many, if not all of us here, as we've looked up perhaps in a northern winter sky and seen the Hunter constellation. It does seem like a hunter facing right, arms stretched out with a bow, and particularly his belt with those 3 stars sloping down. I want you to notice Betelgeuse, the bright red star up in his left shoulder, and Rigel, the dazzling blue star in his right leg. We'll come back to those in a moment. You see, the sun is not really all that big, because if you think again of Orion, follow the line down from his belt down towards the left, you hit upon a star which is the brightest star in the sky, the night sky, which is the dog star Sirius. See, the Hunter is followed by his dogs, and Canis Major is one of those dogs, and in that constellation, Canis Major, there is a star called Sirius, which is that bright white star, which is shown to be much bigger than our sun. But we can go bigger and bigger. We pointed out a moment ago, dazzling blue star in the right leg of Orion, called Rigel. You can see that Rigel is much bigger than Sirius. But even Rigel is put into the shade by Aldebaran, which is up to the top right of Orion, and looking at the star, the large star on the left of that graphic, brings us to Betelgeuse. That bright red star we said was up on the left shoulder of Orion the Hunter. It's 500 light years or thereabouts from Earth, so 500 times 10 trillion kilometers from Earth, and it averages about 700 times the size of our sun. So there are things much, much bigger than our sun. And so we can go on. Betelgeuse, Antares, and Mu Cephei, it's a huge star, which is comparable in size to our entire solar system. But there's something much bigger that I want to share with you. It's a red hypergiant star. Before we look at it, I can't resist showing you this red supergiant star, because it's a very photogenic image. The star in the centre, with a pulse of light emitted from it, reflecting off dust shells around it, give it an eyeball effect. That's rather picturesque. But moving from this to a hypergiant red star, it's depicted by that wall of red upon the right hand side of the screen there. And the sun, our sun, is that little speck relative to it on the left. Our sun, we said at the beginning, was quite big. In fact, almost 1 million Earths can fit inside our sun. But this star is 2,000 times the size of our sun. That means it's 8 billion times the volume of our sun. Or in other words, 8 billion suns can fit inside it. So if almost 1 million Earths can fit inside our sun, and 8 billion suns can fit inside Canis Majoris, if you do the math, that means 8 quadrillion Earths can fit inside this, the largest known star. You see, the sun is just too small to show in true comparison with the star. But we can go bigger and bigger. We talked about the size of the solar system, equating with the star Mu Cephei. But the solar system itself is small by some scales of magnitude. If you shrunk our solar system down to the size of a coin, then the comparison between that coin and the entire continent of North America is the scale of comparison between our solar system and our home galaxy, which is the Milky Way galaxy. It's a galaxy that's 100,000 light years in diameter, and it contains 100 billion stars. And you get some great shots of it from the canyons in the US. While we're out there in space, I just want to show you something of the beautiful scenery in interstellar space as we look at things called nebulae, which are clouds of gas and dust, like the Cat's Eye Nebula. Like the Eagle Nebula, it's perhaps the most iconic image of space, called the Pillars of Creation, those gigantic columns of gas and dust. Perhaps, of all the galaxies, the most picturesque and photogenic is the Sombrero Galaxy. Back to a nebula. Here in the Ring Nebula, a dying star floats in a haze of blue gas, and the whole effect has evoked the imagination of some to say it's like the eye of God watching us from a distance. I like the Crab Nebula image. It seems so fantastically photogenic. But my favourite of all is the deepest visible light image that Hubble has taken of space. 10,000 galaxies are seen here, like little pinwheel galaxies, in the vastness of the tapestry of space. And our question tonight is there anybody out there? Well, I think it's about time to come back down to Earth and to make for home. We're going to zoom back into our home planet at a factor of 100 each time, starting 1 million light years away. And we're zooming in. And at 1 light year from Earth, you can just barely see that little pinprick of our sun in the middle there. At 100 billion kilometers away, you begin to see the solar system, and then zooming in towards the Earth's orbit. And there, at 10,000 kilometers, our beautiful blue home planet. Approaching southeast USA and southwest Tallahassee. And let's just freeze it at 100 meters height, over the lab roof. The oak trees are small. People on the ground are just like the tiniest of ants. And yet inside the ant-like body of these people, there's a fresh world of wonder inside every one of us. We are, as human beings, a collection of some 10 trillion cells. And in each cell there's the marvellous information molecule known as DNA, which we've all heard of. And the DNA inside each of our cells stretches to about 2 meters in length. Bear in mind we're 10 trillion cells, so if you took the DNA from each cell and you laid it end to end in a huge line, do you know how long that line would be? It would stretch from here to the moon and back again 24,000 times. Yes, inside each of our cells, inside our DNA, there is a word, if we can call it that contains more than 3 billion letters. Not the usual alphabetic letters, but the letters, chemical letters, that are depicted there on the screen. How did that information come to be there in all its complexity? Chemistry alone can't explain that. Chemistry cannot account for the physical sequence of letters, whether on a printed page or in the cells of our bodies, as these letters convey information. And that's what led to the conversion of a notorious atheist by the name of Antony Flew. He said there were two things that were scientifically inexplicable to him. One was the unbelievable complexity of the arrangements necessary for life at the cellular level that we've just been looking at. And secondly was the wonder of the universe as a whole that we've also thought about tonight, of which the most famous currently living scientist, Stephen Hawking, says it seems that the laws which describe our universe contain certain numbers known as constants. They're associated with phenomena like gravity, and they're very precise. In fact, he says the remarkable thing about our universe is that if these numbers were different, life would not be able to exist. He says they appear to have been so finely adjusted to permit the possibility of life. And those two great wonders, in the world of the cell and on the scale of the universe as a whole, that led to the world's most notorious atheist, as he called himself, changing his mind. When you look at the stellar heavens, you wonder how and why they are so vast. Perhaps it's simply that that size alone can adequately showcase the majesty of the supernatural designer of all things.